Welcome to our webinar this evening. We're so excited to have you join us. We are speaking tonight on building resilience, understanding patterns of stress to design effective doses of meaningful support. My name is Victoria Burek, and I'm Pandemic Parenting's digital content producer. And we're so excited to have you all here. And we recognize for many of you, this might be your first time joining us. This webinar is part of our bi-weekly Pandemic Parenting Exchange series. Each webinar, our panelists offer science-based knowledge, experience, and resources to help you and your family cope during this pandemic. To stay up to date on our latest webinar, you can follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list, and I'll put links to those in the chat in just a moment. But before we get started, I have a few reminders. I'll be in the background sharing links to a few of the resources that we mentioned during this webinar, and if you don't have a chance to catch all of these or note some of the things on the slides, don't worry, we'll be sharing the pandemic parenting resources along with a recording of this webinar on our website. We would like to welcome you also to tweet along with us. So if you hear a quote that you really enjoy, go ahead and tweet it out, hashtag pandemic parenting, and we'll catch you over there as well. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Amanda Zelahovsky. She is a clinical and forensic psychologist and an associate professor of psychology at Valparaiso University. And also Dr. Lindsay Malloy, who is a developmental and forensic psychologist and an associate professor at Ontario Tech University. You can read more about them and their backgrounds on our website. With that, I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're so excited you're here with us tonight. We are also very excited to talk about this topic. So let me first start though by thanking our sponsors, which without our sponsors, we wouldn't be here tonight. So first we want to thank the Valparaiso University Office of the Provost. So Valparaiso University is my university. It's a private Lutheran university in Northwest Indiana, serving 4,500 students from over 50 countries. The Office of the Provost at Valparaiso University is proud to sponsor the important work of their faculty and alumni. I have personally benefited from this support as they supported my Coronavirus Family Impact Project. So this project is just one of many examples of the high quality and collaborative research conducted by Valpo faculty and students. And Valparaiso University is also extremely proud of the many Valpo students and alumni who have served as moderators, producers, and research assistants for pandemic parenting, including our moderator, which I will tell you about in just a second. Our second sponsor is Overcoming Barriers, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to rethinking parent and child contact problems, where a child is resisting or rejecting contact with a parent in post-separation families. Made up of a diverse team of faculty conflict experts, Overcoming Barriers creates resources and publications for families and mental health professionals, offers professional development and consultation, and raises awareness of innovative approaches for these families. You can find their newest book, Overcoming the Alienation Crisis, 33 Co-Parenting Solutions, on Amazon. Thank you very much to both of our sponsors. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator tonight. One of the things that Lindsay and I have always been excited about doing in these pandemic parenting exchanges is getting to invite a moderator to join us, which is always a current graduate student or emerging scholar in the field, as a way to really highlight and amplify some of our rising stars in the field. So it is my pleasure, as I said, to introduce Rose Luehrs. So Rose is a fourth-year doctoral student in clinical psychology at Suffolk University in Boston, Massachusetts. Her areas of research include the impact of traumatic events on mental health outcomes and adaptation to life following exposure to trauma. So thank you so much for being here, Rose, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. As she said, my name is Rose, and I will be your moderator this evening. So just as a brief overview, we're going to start with having some discussion with our panelists and our guest expert, followed by some Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, just remember to post them in the Q&A in the chat throughout the discussion as you have them. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Bruce Perry, who is the principal of the Neurosequential Model Network, LLC, and a senior fellow of the Child Trauma Academy, a community practice that's based in Houston, Texas. He's also a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago, and the School of Allied Health, College of Science, Health and Engineering at La Trobe University in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. Dr. Perry is the author of over 500 journal articles, book chapters, and scientific proceedings, and of the fantastic book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. So Dr. Perry, before we jump into questions, do you want to offer any introductory remarks?
First of all, I would like to just sort of congratulate all of you on this high quality production. I've been on a number of webinars, and we just kind of throw these things together and start talking, and we have technical difficulties. So this is awesome. And I think this is a tremendous service for families. I have, as I said, I literally have been on over 100 Zoom meetings in the last 6 months. And I think this is maybe the 5th that was really targeted to families. All of the rest of them were sort of for professionals or teachers. I mean, they're important, but I think this is a really unique experience, and I think it's important. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And one of the things I do want to talk about, and this has been a really important issue, really for all of these groups that we've been talking to, and it's important to understand some of this stuff. I think not just for the current times, but understanding stress and understanding how certain patterns of stress are destructive and other patterns are actually healthy is something that really can be important in understanding almost everything that we do, whether or not it's understanding, why high intensity training works in sports. It's important understanding how to actually teach a child how to study. That overnight, studying all night long, pulling an all-nighter is not the way to put content into your brain. It's a way to learn how to truly appreciate what we call self-care. That's it's such an important part of being successful as a therapist, a parent, a teacher, a coach, whatever it is that you do. And I think I could go on and on about this, but what I really want to do is just remind people that the next 5 minutes that I'm going to talk about, even though I'm kind of focusing on the current pandemic, these concepts have real power for all the rest of the other aspects of your life. So let me, I'm going to steal the screen here for a little while and talk about this. So the first thing I want to talk about really is that when we do, the work that we do in my field, I'm a psychiatrist and I work with people who are in the child welfare system, mental health system, juvenile justice, and frequently the language that we use includes terms like stress and trauma and resilience. And it's interesting because people who are not in these fields and people who are just walking the streets use those exact same words, but they have very different meaning. And so part of what I want to do is talk a little bit about what I mean by stress and then walk you through the logic for some of the other things that I'm going to say later on that can help us manage uncontrollable stress and learn how to harness stress in a way that helps make us more resilient and flexible. So first of all, let me just sort of get back to that concept of stress. Stress is really referring to any demand on any of our systems. And all human beings have all of these complex systems that are involved in keeping us alive and keeping us successful in the world. And these systems range from, your cardiovascular system to your muscular system to systems in your brain that are monitoring the external world for potential threats. So all of these systems kind of exist in some balance. There's some sort of equilibrium that they're in. So if you think about a thermostat, for example, you know that when you set your thermostat at a certain level, you have machinery, you have apparatus that will respond to changes in your equilibrium. And so if you set it at 72 degrees and it's really hot outside and it starts to get to be 78 in your house, that will kick in a response. Basically, think of it as a stress response. The stress is heat. You're just getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. That's a stressor. That's the stress. But that pushes this system out of balance. And then there are these apparatus that put you back in balance. So you turn on the air conditioner, and the air conditioner cools it down and cools it down. And it gets down below 72. It gets to 70. And then there'll be a signal to stop. You're back in balance. And if you track the temperature in your house in the summer, it actually isn't at a stable line. It goes up and then it goes back down. And it has this rhythmic pattern that keeps you in this range. And we have this similar apparatus when it's really cold out. But it's a different mechanism. It's a different response to a different stressor. The different stressor is it's cold. And so you activate the furnace and it gets warmer. And we've got these in all of our systems in our body have what we call stress response capabilities. And part of what we know is the flexibility and the responsivity of these response systems gets better with practice. And so I think a lot of you, if you live up north, you're used to that time of year when it starts to get cold, and you should have somebody come and look at your furnace and make sure it's still working, because you haven't done anything, for 4 months. It hasn't even turned on. And so one of the things that's really important to remember about stress is that stress in and of itself is nothing to be afraid of. The key thing is that if there is a pattern of stress activation where there's a certain degree of predictability and the stressor or the challenge is moderate, and there's an element of control, that literally builds strength into these stress response systems. And it's a little bit like, I always use the analogy of, it's like weightlifting. If you go to the gym and you stress your muscles in a moderate way, you don't lift 500 pounds because you can't lift it. You lift 50 pounds and you do it 10 times until your muscle's really tired. But what you're doing is sending a signal to the muscles to say, hey, you're going to be working. You're going to be working more than you usually do. So if this happens again, maybe we should turn on the genes that make actin and myosin and make your muscles stronger. And that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of stressor that can really help you and can become very, very positive. Now, the problem is the very same neurobiological systems that are involved in building resilience are the systems that are involved in the vulnerabilities that we see when somebody has extreme activation of the stress response, like a just unremitting trauma, or somebody has a pattern of stress activation that's unpredictable or prolonged. You don't have to have all of these. Any one of these patterns will lead to changes in the stress response system that makes your stress response system lose what we refer to, and I think I'm going to find the slide here, what we refer to as a linear state reactivity curve. And so I'm going to explain this for 1 second and then come back and we'll have a little bit of discussion about some of this stuff. But if you wake up in a safe and familiar environment and you have a neurotypically organized stress response capability, and you wake up in a safe, familiar environment, what happens is that you will have an appropriately proportional activation of your stress response internally. If you have a moderate challenge, like the kinds of moderate challenges that come with, giving a lecture or giving a presentation at work or trying to manage homeschooling while you're also supposed to be in a meeting, if you're neurotypically organized, you can still stay in this active alert state, and you still have access to the top parts of your brain. And one of the things that we know about stress is that the first thing that happens when you start to get really, really stressed and distressed is that rather than having full access to all parts of your brain, particularly the smart part of your brain involved in speech, language, thinking, planning, you end up looking like this. You have big parts of your cortex get shut down. And we can come back and talk some more about this in a minute. But the key thing about these patterns of stress reactivity is that they can shift you from a pattern of being linear and neurotypical in the way you respond to stress to becoming sensitized. And what that means is if your system becomes sensitized from those unhealthy patterns of stress, you basically wake up in your own home and there's no demands on you, but your brain tells you that you're under threat. And what that result, the consequences of that reorganization of your stress response system are many. It puts you at greater risk for physical health problems. It makes it harder for you to learn. It makes it harder for you to form healthy relationships, and you'll end up with a cascade of problems. And anybody, if those of you who know anything about post-traumatic stress disorder or have kind of done Trauma 101, you'll recognize that a sensitized stress response is basically the hallmark of trauma-related problems. So I'm going to go through one last very brief set of slides here, and then we'll have a conversation. And I haven't gone too much. I haven't eaten up too much time. All right. So let's say we've got this. We've got these patterns of stress. Let's say that you kind of look at how we can manage these stress response patterns and change them. And we can change them because of the wonderful malleability of the human brain. And a lot of you have heard of neuroplasticity, and I'm sure different people have heard different ways of that explained. But the bottom line is this, is that all of these systems in your brain are changeable. You can change the set point. You can make yourself more resilient, or you can make yourself more vulnerable. I mean, I maybe shouldn't use the term you can make yourself, but you can become more resilient. You can become less resilient. And so if you are in the current situation and you're able to maintain a daily structure, and you have family meals, and you limit your media contact and don't fall into doom scrolling on Twitter, which is a lot of people get into that. They literally, anyway. I mean, I'm always curious. I ask my friends who do that, I go, have you ever seen anybody change their mind based upon something you wrote on Twitter? I mean, I don't think it's ever happened. Anyway.
I prefer to call it panic scrolling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Guilty, right.
So if you can do these things, you have a much higher probability of staying here if you started out here. On the other hand, if you find yourself, starting out in your neurotypically organized and you sort of fall into this, which has happened to a lot of people. And I think of those of you who've been following the data about increased rates of suicidality, increased rates of depression, increased rates of anxiety, increased rates of relapse for people that have been, on maintenance for substance use or alcohol abuse. This is the kind of stuff that shifts makes you more vulnerable. And this is happening way, way, way for far too many folks. And now, here's one of the things that I think is really important for us to keep in mind. Those of us who are lucky enough, and I would suspect all of the faculty members here and most of the people here have been lucky enough and privileged enough in their lives to have these core aspects of their personal history that increase the probability that you're going to have this resilience building set of experiences. And so work and housing and income and connections and all these things that many of us benefit from. And so a lot of us started out in a pandemic over here. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that we know and work with, and many of the kids and families in the systems I work with, they started out over here because their developmental histories were just peppered with all of these things, which are going to create severe, prolonged, and uncontrollable stress in their lives. And so here's the thing that's been happening to all of the people who started out here. And I know, this has happened to every single person I know. They have lost their superpowers. They're now waking up on Monday morning as tired as they were on Friday. They used to be on Fridays at the end of a work week. The number of decisions we have to make, the number of bandwidth that gets consumed, the ongoing exhaustion that's part of the prolonged and unpredictable aspects of this for many, many people. Right before we went on, we were talking about how that we've had changes in schooling in all of our kids' schools already. And so I don't want you to be afraid of stress, but I want you to recognize that prolonged stress is exhausting. You cannot maintain even a moderate stress activation for a very long time without physically and emotionally wearing out. And this is why, and I think this is an important message for parents, we have to be really gentle on our kids and on ourselves when it comes to what you used to get done in a week. What used to be a normal expectation, curricular expectation, all those things need to be changed. We need to back off on expectations and focus on trying to create a little bit more controllability, predictability, and nurturing for the kids that we work with. And for any of you who work with kids or families that started out here, this is what you're going to see. There's going to be, I predict, an almost catastrophic shift in the needs of these families that will overwhelm our already resource-stretched systems. And that coupled with that is that all of the people who work in these systems who basically were relying upon their superhero resilient powers are going to come back to work and they've lost their superpowers. And so you're going to have an exhausted, tired, overwhelmed workforce coming back to work with and try to help extremely challenged and overwhelmed families and children. And that's a recipe for disaster. And I think that it's going to take multiple years for our public systems to catch up on this. But I'm off topic. This isn't really, parents don't want to hear all this. But what I do want to do is I think the key message here is that I want families to recognize that they need to shift their expectations, particularly the ones that they hold themselves to. And because your ability to be an effective parent is going to be completely dependent upon how regulated you are, how well you are. And if you're on your last nerve and you're trying to help your kids who are going through this, it's just not going to work. So anyway.
Yeah.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yes. And what a great, just such a,
thank you.
Yeah, like an honest, raw, you're just telling it like it is. And I, even just sort of listening and knowing these things, it's just still so reassuring to hear, like, yes, I love that frame. We have lost our superpower. But there are times we watch superhero movies in my house all the time, right? But the superhero has to take off their superhero suit at times to just catch their breath, rejuvenate. So, there are breaks. And so I think the way you were framing right now, the words you used, unpredictable, extreme, prolonged, but that is what a pandemic is. So that already is causing stress. And now we are in this prolonged without any sort of end in sight. So thank you for that reassurance.
The good news is that we will get through this. I mean, this will pass. certainly not by November 3rd, as we've been promised, but it will pass. And but I really hope that we all learn from this. I mean, I think there's some amazing learnings that we can grasp from this, and we'll see. I think that this, one example for us is that, I mean, I know Amanda knows this, but our workforce, our team, has always been a virtual team. We do have offices somewhere, but nobody goes to them. Almost all of the people that we work with work from home. We've been incredibly efficient. We've cut down on the number of meetings we have. When we do have meetings, we get work done. And if we do want to create team and cohesion, we actually do fun things instead of have the weird fantasy that having a meeting is going to be team building. So I do think that we can learn about these things and still be effective in the new world.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
That gives me some hope. Thank you.
We need it.
I do miss the snacks at meetings, so I think that there should be a way to introduce those.
A free coffee.
So yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I was thinking about when you were talking about the different aspects of stress that can make it really bad. I was thinking about when we launched our longitudinal study on families and COVID towards the beginning of the pandemic in North America. One of the constructs that my colleague who's working on the project with me said we should measure is intolerance to uncertainty. And so we have a measure of that in our study. So we have that at baseline for everyone. But I was really, and we haven't looked at this data in, oh, sorry, somebody said it's hard to hear me. Is that better?
Yes.
We haven't looked at the data in depth yet, but I was pretty amazed to just look and see what people's baseline scores were like on that intolerance to uncertainty and just how much variability there was. When I was reading the measure, I was like, oh, check. Yes, that's why I'm struggling so much with this, because of the uncertainty and because I have a very apparently low tolerance for uncertainty. So I was just wondering if you could kind of speak to how the things that we can control, or how do we kind of build up our ability to cope with this level of prolonged uncertainty and not let the stress that we're feeling trickle down to our kids. And I probably just asked six different questions in there. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think you asked three of the most important questions about this whole thing, or mentioned three of the most important points. One is the whole trickle down thing and I think most parents kind of know this, but I'm going to be really explicit about this. But as go the parents, so goes the child. Mm-hmm. And that's just the bottom line. That they, as much as you want to hide your fear or your anger or your sadness and protect them, it is perceived in the emotional climate in the home. They feel it. And so this is why it's so important to really take care of yourself. It's not selfish for you to go running or go take a walk or go have coffee. That's not selfish. That's just taking care of your children through you. And so the other question was, and it's really important, is about how do you make structure out of chaos? Mm-hmm. And so, and this is another one of the hardest things, and it's everybody's going to have heard of sort of the prayer about the things I can't control and the things I can control. That's a really important thing. And so, if you are the kind of person, and I'm not saying you are, Lindsay, but if you are the kind of person that before this really needed a plan and really liked to have everything predictable and wanted to know, in fact, the term I tend to use is it's a fun word. It's a legitimate term. It's called procrastinators. They're folks that will not feel comfortable until the details of an event are planned, even if the event is not going to take place for a month. They want to know, who's going to take care of the lunch and who's going to clear this. And I'll be in those meetings and they're talking about that stuff. I'm like, a month? We're talking about lunch in a month from now? So as your survey showed, right, there's different people are like, I can handle some uncertainty. What I would predict is the longer this goes on, the less tolerant everybody's going to become about uncertainty. There are people that I know that are very well regulated who got up at meetings about, going back to school and were just literally lost their shit. Oh, this is being recorded, sorry. Okay. No. Literally had a very emotional response about stuff that I know they would never have bothered them prior to this. So I think everybody's wanting to know the plan because there's so much nebulousness, so much unknown, so much unpredictability, so much perceived uncontrollability. Now, the interesting thing for me is that people sometimes get lost in over-focusing on the stuff they can't control. So they'll have conversation after conversation after conversation about something. You aren't the person that decides this. The superintendent of schools is. So listen, let's only have one news cycle on it. Let's move on to something what can you do? Well, you can make sure that your kids go to bed at the same time every night. You can make sure that your bedtime routines are either tightened up or maintained. You can recapture family meals. You can say, hey, this is a time we've always been talking about having sort of screen-free time, and here's what we're going to do. New family rule. Everybody's going to put their electronic device in a hat in the middle of the table while we have breakfast or lunch or whatever. You can control tons of stuff. You can control when you go. For those people that like a lot of control, I literally sit down with them and we'll start talking. I say, all right, here's what you have to do. You have to get up at 10 minutes to the hour, every hour, and walk for 10 minutes. I don't care if you walk in a circle, take a walk outside, if you walk up and down your stairs, but you cannot be in front of your screen. I don't care if you have to excuse yourself from a meeting. Just say, I've got to go to the bathroom, or Dr. Perry says I have to leave. Whatever you do, that's you're taking control, you're building structure, and then you're going to do something that's regulating. It's a pattern, repetitive, rhythmic regulating thing. And so you can control all kinds of stuff that you tend not to think about. So that's the kind of thing that I think, is important. I'm not saying don't look at the news, but once you kind of learn the news of the day, you don't need to hear it 85 different times. And then you don't need to hear 25 different talking heads tell you how you're supposed to think and rev you up into some sort of like completely escalated thing about the world's going to hell. It's going to be civil war. Donald Trump's going to become a dictator. And, it's all bullshit. Just go take care of your household, go vote. But don't let yourself get into these ruminative cycles. And I've seen more and more people do that. And I'm rambling, but that's the kind of thing. Those are the kinds of things I think that we should do. You can literally sit down with a sheet of paper and go, what can I control? I can control when I brush my teeth. I can control when I get up. I can control meals. I can control what we have at meals. I can control exercises and screen time. And you literally get a list of, those of you who like control, there's a lot of shit there's so much to control. Yeah. You'll feel back in a sync really quickly, as long as you spend your bandwidth on the stuff you can control and you give just a tiny little bit of bandwidth to the stuff you can't control. But what I've been seeing is that people are giving all their bandwidth to stuff they can't control. Anyway,
the uncertainty thing, it's so interesting, Lindsay. Like, I think I must fall on the other end of that continuum. I can deal with uncertainty. I'm definitely not a procrastinator. I was like, I don't even understand what you're talking about. There are people like that in the world. But just to think, for me, it was, as long as I know when the uncertainty will end, like I can deal with this for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months. Okay, let's rally. We'll make routines. We'll make this fun. But just tell me when it will end and I can, quote, get back to normal, right? And I think that's what a lot of parents we've been talking with are just sort of how the stamina piece of this. Like, so how do we think about resilience with the stamina for something that we actually just don't know when it'll end?
Or that we started off I started off treating it more like a sprint, and it actually turns out it's going to be more of a marathon. So,
yeah.
And it's not even a marathon. It's you guys know what through hiking is? A through hike is the people that walk from Mexico to Canada.
No.
Oh, this is a thing that people do.
It's like doing the Appalachian Trail. So people that do the Appalachian Trail, that's called through hiking. This is what we're on. We're on a through hike. And we're going to get rained on, and we're going to have beautiful days, and then we're going to get snowstorms, and we're going to we're going to fall and sprain our ankle, and it's going to be compared to a marathon, which is 26 miles of shuffling along. That's nothing. Yeah. We're on a through hike, and it's going to take months and months and months. And I think that our through hike, like I said before, I don't think the through hike is going to end when we get a vaccine or even a year from now. I think the through hike for the people who really work with vulnerable families, that's going to be multiple years.
Yeah. We're getting so many awesome questions, Rose. I know we'll stop.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one really big question that's really tough that everyone wants to know the answer to is, why do some children who experience terrible traumatic events in their early lives go on to lead healthy, normal lives when others do not?
Well, I just wrote a book about that.
Quick memory.
And I'm not kidding. I literally was editing it 10 minutes before we started.
Oh, wow.
It's a great question. And it's a complex answer. But part of what we know is that the major factor in adult, youth, or child getting over a traumatic experience, or lots of traumatic experiences, is the degree to which that person can get into safe, stable relationships. And if that happens, there's tremendous hope for positive prognosis. And it's not like these kids will be perfect, and it's not like everything will be gone. In fact, I would argue that even when somebody looks as if they're doing really well from the outside world, and they are doing fine in school, and they have some friends, and they can form relationships, they may still be carrying some vulnerabilities that have to do with risk for heart disease, or risk for asthma, or risk for other things that were impacted by their developmental trauma and have not yet manifest. So, I mean, I don't want to suggest everybody's going to, it's terrible, but different people carry this burden in different ways. And if you think about it as a burden, it really is important, because the more people you have around to give a little bit of the junk in your burden bag, the more they help carry it. And it really does take the load off of people who've had trauma to have a caring relationship, or somebody is going to be understanding and nurturing and model healthy behaviors and all kinds of stuff. So we find it, we've got, one of the things that we've published in the last couple of years is that when we look at, and again, I assume many of you have heard of the ACE study, so which basically shows a correlation between the number of adversities you have in childhood and your health in a lot of different areas. So a lot of adversities means increased risk for physical health, mental health, social health problems. But we actually were able to show that if you have people that have a lot of adversity, but they have counterbalancing relationships, they actually don't have bad outcomes like people who have twice as many adversities and no relational support. So it's like buffers. That's the key thing, is relationships. If you're able to connect to culture, family, community, it's a tremendous buffer of present stressor And it's the healing environment that will really be important for recovering from past trauma.
That's great. Yeah.
So how do parents know how much stress is okay or dosed versus too much and harmful or traumatic?
Well, that's actually a good question. And the best way that you can, and I'm going to just show you this, I'm going to show you a slide. Let me get it up first, and then I'll, what did I do? All right, I need to share it. And then before that, I need to find you guys. Where are you? There you are. Too many windows open at once. All right, so I'm going to share this. So that question about dosing is really, really important. And the reason it's important is that what a moderate dose is for one kid can be an overwhelming dose for another kid. And what we know is that if you look at this curve, the dose of novelty or challenge, basically, that a neurotypically organized kid can tolerate and still stay in this active alert state so they can process and function and learn and everything else, it's pretty big. But if you take a child who has a history of trauma or has a sensitized stress response system for a variety of reasons, the dose that they can tolerate is very low. And there may be parents listening who have seen this kind of difference in their own kids, that they might have one child who's very sensitive and something that another child would have sort of found to be pretty easy to deal with, they find overwhelming. And so the key is, if you give children control over aspects of the interaction or the challenge or the learning experience, they will show you what a moderate dose of challenge is. And they'll teach you not only about dosing, but about another concept that is important is spacing. So some kids can actually have a moderate challenge and pretty quickly get back to their baseline and then tolerate another moderate challenge. And that's down here would be, this is the thermostat set in a neurotypical range right here. Whereas a child who's a little bit tuned up, they can only tolerate smaller doses of challenge, and they need a longer period of time to get back to their baseline. And so this is where being an attuned parent is really important. I'm sure there are many parents who are now having their light bulbs go off in their head, where they're like, oh, I thought, I'll just give you an example from my life. My oldest son, and when we had kids, we had a little, my oldest son, and he was one of those kids that were like, I'd say stuff like, don't do that, and he'd stop. And it was like, awesome, I'm a great parent. I thought, and we, my wife and I would be out in public, and we see the other kids like running wild, like real kids. And we had this just little sort of, I don't know how that happened, but he's just placid and curious, and he'd go exploring, but then we go, don't do that, don't climb there. And he just, okay. And then we had our second child, who was like Satan spawn. I mean, it was like unbelievable. Nothing. I mean, drove us crazy. It just was she was so dysregulated. She was one of these sensitized kids. And we don't know for sure, but it might have had to do with some sort of perinatal hypoxia when she had a really tough birth. But she was like, from the moment she was born, she was like, any sensory overload just whacked her out. And, I mean, and we realized that it had nothing to do with how well we parented. It had to do with just the temperamental regulatory characteristics of the child. Yeah. And we didn't learn shit about parenting from our first kid. Our second kid taught us so much about parenting. And anyway, sorry about my foul language, but so I think the key is you kind of have to take your lead from the child. The child kind of tells you what's moderate, what's too much.
Yeah. Well, and that just makes me think there's so many things right now, because this is all so new for parents and kids the last 6-7 months, that there are so many things we didn't even know we would have to dose or space with our kids. Like, I just think about, like you said, the differences across kids. Like, my kids responded to Zoom school very differently. I had one that craved the connection, couldn't wait every day to log in. And I had another one that completely shut down because it was this overload, and I don't know when I'm supposed to unmute or if the teacher's talking to me. I mean, he just completely melted down. So it was just things like, oh, okay, like you said, we needed to be attuned and learn. Like, I didn't realize that was causing him so much stress. And so once you talk to the teacher and realize he doesn't have to log in if he doesn't want, like, just learning the differences and how to dose and space things for them. And we were having to do that. All of us parents are having to do that every day, multiple times a day, like triage a bunch of different things for each kid. So I just think it's back to that idea of grace. On top of that,
then you're supposed to be doing your own work from home. And
yeah,
I mean, it really, all of this stuff has just been incredibly challenging, I think. And I just keep thinking about those poor parents that have 3 kids and they've got, they got a tiny little apartment, and they're supposed to be working, and they've got to manage these 3 kids and 3 different sort of levels of expectation. It just is such an unrealistic set of demands.
Yeah. Lindsay has called it relentless parenting, which I have appreciated. Yes.
That's really what it feels like a lot. And I'm saying that it feels like relentless parenting. And I have an extremely supportive spouse who arguably does more of the child care and schooling than I do. I spend a lot of time thinking about parents who are, doing this on their own. I mean, I really have no clue how they're managing that. And I have a lot of respect for anybody who's going through that right now. Some of the feedback we're getting is that they're not doing it. I mean, like any normal human being, they're just tuning out. And I think not all, but many of our schools have made some major mistakes about the way they're doing this. So, for example, we do a lot of work with schools, and we had a teacher who's in one of our programs that we're involved in, and her kindergartner is being homeschooled, and they want this kid on a Zoom 6-hour Zoom meeting, and they're keeping attendance, and they don't want you to turn the camera off. And it's like, I'm like, what? Who in the hell is in charge here? That's nuts.
Or they can't eat, or they have to be right. And it's just sort of like, but you're in that child's home and not realize, there's a lot to that. Yeah.
So on that note, how can parents meet their children's needs right now when they can't even meet their own?
Well, this is where I would say, let's talk about expectations, right? And what you really want to do is sort of focus on what are the core needs that these kids have right now. The core need is that they need to feel loved and they need to feel safe. And so honestly, whatever it takes for you to make your kid feel loved and safe, whether it's like, more hugs, doing more things with them, I'm not trying to incite a rebellion against education right now, but if there are expectations that you feel are getting in the way of your child feeling good about themselves, feeling like learning is fun, learning is good, you should stop them. And you should notify your school that this is your experience, this is your opinion, this is your, you just think that it makes things worse when you have these unrealistic expectations. And I can guarantee you that almost none of this is coming from teachers. The pressures about what to do are coming from an administrative level, about expectations and what needs to get done and how you're going to do it, and you figure it out. You're the teachers, and so they're stuck. And I think when parents and teachers together basically say, what you've come up with is not working, we need to either back off, have a redo on content. I just start laughing when I think about people who get all whacked out that, oh my God, kids are going to lose 6 months of learning. Like, no, they aren't. No, they aren't. They're going to learn all kinds of stuff. It's not going to be what, necessarily what you want in the curriculum, but they can learn a ton of stuff. and it can be fun. And then when they get back into school, then we can pick up with your little curricular expectations, and these kids will catch up really quickly if they feel safe and regulated. And if the teachers feel safe and regulated, but no amount of pushing and prodding and poking and yelling, cajoling and punishing will make kids or teachers create a better learning environment if you flog them through this pandemic.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know,
That's,
exactly. Mic drop, right.
Yeah.
Someone in the chat.
Really popular with administrators.
I want to read you one of the questions we just got in the chat from Carol Schreiber. I hope that's how I say your name. What steps can be taken to work on shifting our body's stress response from vulnerable or sensitized to resilient, especially in the midst of all of us being more heightened and stressed?
Well, this is where I kind of come back to the importance of your body, literally your physiology. And I mentioned walking, but there are a lot of other really powerful and important regulatory things that you can do with your body to help you become more regulated and sort of move towards a more predictable pattern of stress activation. One of them is to really start to pay attention to your breathing and learn a little bit about regulatory breathing. There are a number of breathing techniques that are taught through yoga or mindfulness or the SEAL team, whatever, they all use the same techniques, but they're basically taking advantage of the physiology of feedback from your body, getting up into your brain and telling your brain to calm down. And so if you learn about these regulatory techniques, if you practice a little bit of mindfulness, whatever your regulatory go-to thing is, if you like to read, if you're sort of a dissociative regulator, learn how to do proactive doses of reading. Mm-hmm. And whether it's reading a poem or 2 pages in a book of lessons or something, or 2 pages in a novel, whatever you want to do. But it's the same thing I said earlier about this 10 minutes of walking. Whatever you find regulating, if you learn how to be disciplined and do it in a proactive, structured way, you'll find that your baseline level, your thermostat's going to go down. And it takes discipline more than anything. It doesn't take that much time because you can actually do most of these things for 90 seconds and you're fine. So a 90-second regulatory thing, 25 minutes later, set a timer or do a little watch thing, and 90 seconds later on, and you'll find that, little by little by little by little, you'll feel more regulated. And so those are some of the things. Some people are much more physically active, they swim or they ride bikes or they do yoga, or all of those things I think can be very, very helpful. So that's one of the really important things. The other thing, and this is, I think it's important to remember that when you actually are physically nurturing to your child, it makes you feel regulated as well. Mm-hmm. And so don't underestimate the power of touch. And even if it's just sitting next to your child while they're doing something, even if they're playing their little video games, just sit next to them, just kind of rub their hair a little bit. It'll make you feel better. It'll make them feel better. You can do other little simple things like, hey, everybody's into washing your hands, right? Wash your hands together. And so do the ABC song or whatever you use, and just that touch, the skin-to-skin touch stuff, literally for both of you releases really powerfully important and regulatory hormones. And so again, if you sort of think about your day and you've got a couple doses of touch here and you got a couple doses of walking here and you got some doses of regulatory breathing, pretty soon your whole day is filled with these doses of regulating activity that haven't really stolen any of your productive minutes. And this is the fear of a lot of people, that, oh, I don't have time to do this because I've got to get Billy on his school, and then I've got to get into this meeting. And the truth is, you will find that if you are disciplined enough to do that, your effective time will double. You will literally be twice as productive if you're regulated. And the more frazzled you get, the less productive you are. I mean, and the other thing you should do, and I know this is just an interesting mental exercise, and this will cognitively help you when you get in one of these panics. Literally time how long it takes for you to get Billy on a Zoom meeting. And you'll find it, you'll start thinking about it, worrying about it 15 minutes before, and the reality is it takes like, if you're really bad at it, it takes 90 seconds. So these, and again, I actually, somebody in your group is a procrastinator, because you guys asked me to be on this Zoom call 30 minutes before it started. Emily, who works with me, said, I know you're not going to want to do this, but they want you on 30 minutes before. I'm like, what do they want me 30 minutes before this? Because I usually, literally, I will get on a Zoom call, 90 seconds before the Zoom call starts. And you'll start learning how to do that with the routines in your own home. Once you realize how long it really takes. A lot of the stuff that we think takes a long time really doesn't take a long time. Mm-hmm. And then there's stuff that I don't know how many of you had this experience where you're supposed to brush your teeth for 2 minutes. Jeez, that's a long damn time, right? So 2 minutes is it's a long time.
Cover
so
your
the next time you feel stretched, I can't do those 2 minutes to take a couple of deep breaths and get regulated. It's a long time. Time and figure out all the things that you do every day. Just figure out how long do they really take. Mm-hmm. And you realize, wow, I don't need to sort of get all prepped 15 minutes before this or 12 minutes for that or time. And again, I'm not encouraging people to be irresponsible about time. I think that you'll be shocked at some of this stuff. And then once you realize it, then it kind of frees you up. You're like, oh, wow, I got a lot more time than I thought.
And when you're doing those little 2-minute things, like you said, I also think your kids are watching that and learning from you. Like they're watching you regulate yourself and learning how to do that or when to do that. And so it's Absolutely. Even more productive. Yeah.
And a lot of kids like to do it with you. You can teach them these breathings. I mean, my grandson, I just have to laugh because there'll be times, in fact, he did it today. My wife and I were, talking about things and a little heated. It wasn't really heated, but he comes in and he goes, and he starts deep breathing, a model for us that we need to sort of take a little break. It's pretty funny. It's like, all right, you got it.
Love that.
We weren't arguing.
There's a great, the Elmo song, Belly Breathe. Is anybody else familiar with that song? Yeah, it'll get stuck in your head, but that's a good one for at least for the very little ones. It's not going to work for the teens, maybe, but
you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I think it's really important too to point out how quick they can be. I remember when I had my second child, I had pretty bad postpartum anxiety after, and the woman I was working with on that told me to download this free app called Breathe to Relax, I think, or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it was a few minutes a day, and it just kind of went over these very simple breathing exercises. And it, anecdotally anyway, it helps a lot. And it doesn't have to be something that, takes a huge chunk of your time to make a difference. So.
It's amazingly powerful. And I wasn't kidding. They teach SEALs how to do this. One of the most important things about performing under pressure is staying regulated. And so they literally have these breathing rituals that they do before they do certain activities. And they have intentional transitions where they do regulatory activities when they're doing these high pressure, high timed things. Literally. So in the midst of this highly timed thing, it's, at 1:01 we have to be here, at 1:07 we have to be here. They stop and they do these. They'll literally say, let's do our threes. And they do, their threes, sometimes it's fives. And then that makes them all more regulated because, you know, they get stirred up in the middle of all this stuff, but it keeps them cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have time for one more question. Oh, were you going to say something?
Okay.
Else?
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paige asked, could you speak a little bit about mindfulness and how you would best teach or demonstrate this to children?
Yeah, mindfulness is a phrase. It's interesting because it's a little bit like stress. You talk to 5 different people, they're going to have 5 different ideas about what mindfulness is. And so honestly, what I would recommend is that you go read about it. There are some wonderful resources for people that want to learn a little bit more about kind of mindfulness 101. You know, there's a whole group of folks that are much more Buddhist about it, and they are, I don't want to say territorial, but they, you know, they believe that this is a specific way that you should do it. And then there's other people that have sort of co-opted some of the mindfulness practices and woven them in with other things. So I actually would recommend that people read about it. I mean, and some of the nicest stuff to read is Dan Siegel's work is really, really nice. It's easy to read, and he's such a pleasant guy to listen to. You can listen to him on you know, some of his YouTube stuff, and you'll get sort of a good sense of what it is. But because there are many ways that you can actually implement a mindfulness set of practices. You know, you can have mindfulness around eating or around exercise or around editing or problem solving. And so the reason I want you to go read about it is because I think you should at least know that there's sort of a pure mindfulness sort of set of beliefs and practices. And that a lot of the other stuff you hear about mindfulness are just in some ways offshoots of those concepts and practice.
Yeah. There's a lot of great apps, especially for kids too, that have guided meditations and stories that are read, and YouTube videos. So yeah, it's been amazing to see the proliferation of resources around mindfulness specifically for kids. So yeah.
Well, speaking of being...
Oh, you muted again. There you go.
You said the host muted me.
Not me.
Yeah, I just want to be really mindful of your time, Dr. Perry. And I know we're just past 10 o'clock now. So I think we wanted to thank you so much for being here tonight with us. It has really been amazing. One of the things that I do to kind of wind down is I listen to books on Audible when I'm walking at night, and I'm listening to your book right now.
Oh.
I wouldn't say it's very interesting. Well, I mean,
I'm not sure that's good bedtime reading, but
yeah, no, but I'm really enjoying it. So thank you. So let us know what you thought. Victoria should have just popped a feedback link in the chat. So give us some feedback there. You can learn more about Dr. Perry's work at bdperry.com and neurosequential.com, one word. I think Victoria will pop those links in the chat too. And we wanted to say thank you again to our sponsors, Valparaiso University and Overcoming Barriers, to Rose for moderating. Thank you, Victoria, and the whole pandemic parenting team. If you learned anything tonight, and I know I did, and hopefully you did as well, if you found these resources helpful, please consider making a contribution to pandemic parenting. Victoria will put the link in the chat. So Amanda and I donate all of our time to this. This money just goes to support the people who support us on the kind of tech end of things. You can find links to our previous webinars and all of our resources on our website, which is pandemic-parent.org. There's so many things to remember here, so I just want to make sure. Our next webinar is 2 weeks from tonight, and it's going to be on sort of pandemic pregnancy and postpartum time. So it's pregnant during a pandemic, resources and support for before, during, and after pregnancy. So that's kind of for moms-to-be, new moms, and those who support them. So sign up for that if you're interested. And once again, thank you to Dr. Bruce Perry. It's been a real honor to have you on tonight and to get to know you and chat with you like this. It's been really wonderful. I know it's late at night and we appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work, guys.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for your wonderful questions and thoughts. We look forward to seeing you again. Take care of yourselves.
Bye.